I'm Margaret Preston, president of Power Over Parkinson's, and today, in conjunction with our Pop Profile series, we have Dr. Rachel Dolhun, the principal medical advisor at the Michael J. Fox Foundation. Dr. Dolhun, thank you so much for sharing your time and being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you. So I wanted to jump in immediately and kind of get to know you, a couple get to know you questions. It's always nice to get to know the person behind the neurologist before we jump into the nuts and bolts of Parkinson's. So I wanted to ask, as we begin our discussion, take us through a couple minutes and share with our listeners what led you into a career of neurology.
It's a great question, and I appreciate the chance to share. I went to medical school really not knowing what I was going to do. I was very quickly enthralled by the brain, the complexity of it, the mysteries. And so I left medical school going into neurology, knowing that I was just fascinated by the puzzle of the brain. I also loved about neurology that you could look at all of these different kinds of diseases, whether it be stroke or headaches or seizures, and be a specialist, so I could still see people from all different walks of life, all different ages, but be a specialist in that area and focus on the brain. While I was in my neurology training, you're exposed to all of these different areas. So, I'm seeing people with strokes and dementia and ALS and all of these kinds of things. But of course, seeing people with Parkinson's and other movement disorders. And I quickly just fell in love with that patient population. So with all of the people, especially with Parkinson's and their families, I just really loved the people. As I said, I mean, the people with Parkinson's are some of the nicest on the planet. So I always say selfishly, I went in because my patients were always so nice. But I also really enjoyed that we could have a relationship that could develop over the years. And so, of course, Parkinson's is a lifelong condition. So I'm really able to get to know people and then know their families and know them and really walk through Parkinson's with them.
Yeah.
So it's really, about that relationship that so many of us really treasure in caring for people with Parkinson's. And then, of course, I had really good mentors. I had people who modeled so well caring for people with Parkinson's. And, movement disorders and Parkinson's, it's kind of good news, bad news. It's one of the last medical specialties where we really rely on all we almost have is the conversation with people and their families and our physical exam.
Yeah.
So we're starting to get tools, which is great and much needed, but it really is that, we can't just run and do a test and excuse somebody and look at the MRI results. We really have to use our brains and we have to use that relationship in order to best care for somebody.
Yeah, that's so well said. It's such a partnership through conversation over the years. So I think that's beautifully said. Thank you for sharing that. As we continue to kind of get to know you and kind of how you sustain optimism, right? Certainly at the Fox Foundation, how do you sustain optimism and remain enthusiastic over the course of a disease that certainly progresses and folks decline? So tell me kind of your mechanisms to keeping the optimism.
It comes largely, I think, from the community itself. Everybody or many people in the Parkinson's community practice that optimism themselves, but also bring your experiences and your learning so that I can learn from those. And, and it's always that what gets me out of bed and what gets me to work and everybody at the foundation to work every day is our community. We cannot do our work without you. So while we're aiming to serve you and build the best resources and fund the research that's necessary, it all comes back to the community. And so that community, of course, is what drives me, what drives us. But a couple different areas for, to me specifically as a clinician, I think one of the interesting things is when I was pursuing neurology, which was 20 plus years ago now, there was this myth that still, I think, kind of comes around that it's like, you can't do anything for,
Mhm.
why would you want to go into that? There aren't any cures, or you can't really do anything. Well, we've already talked about what you can do. So
Sure.
much of it is just in the relationship, right? But also in the decade that I've been at the foundation, since I left practice, we've seen an explosion of new therapies. So there have been 20 new Parkinson's therapies just in the last 10 years alone. So we're seeing the research drive some of that optimism and some
Yeah.
of that what hope and what we can
Mhm.
do. And then I'll also say that I think while I was always passionate, I was reinvigorated in the last couple of years when I sought, again, mostly informed by the community, but I sought this certification in lifestyle medicine on top
Mhm.
of my neurology certification. And what that is simply bringing all of our day to day, our movement, our diet, our sleep, our stress management into the care of Parkinson's or into navigating life with Parkinson's. So using those, leveraging those as tools to
Yeah.
live as well as we can with Parkinson's. And so in hearing from the community, in seeking that certification, and in bringing lifestyle to the Parkinson's treatments I mentioned, to Parkinson's research, all of those kinds of things, it's really kind of reinvigorated my passion and my ability to connect with the community.
Yeah. Well, you said I couldn't ask for a better segue talking about you can't do anything, but you really can. Let's move on to exercise, which is a big component of a way patients can certainly kind of take hold of the disease, determine how it progresses, how they feel each day. And it's certainly something we're passionate about here at Power for Parkinson's with our exercise classes. So, how do you direct those patients who are new to exercise or diagnosed with Parkinson's, but perhaps new to exercise? How do you direct those folks to really kind of get started with a regimen that they can sustain over time?
It's such a good question because it can feel so overwhelming,
Yeah.
right? And what I
Mhm.
always say is, and we're probably preaching a little bit to the choir with your group, but everybody knows we're supposed to exercise, right? I mean, that's not the big issue here. It's how do we actually exercise? So
Right.
when our lives aren't set up for it, when it hasn't been part of our daily practice, when Parkinson's gets in the way,
Mm.
how do we then actually incorporate exercise?
Yeah.
So one big thing I'll say at the front end is I never want anyone to feel guilty or like they're responsible for Parkinson's progressing or changing because, maybe they're not doing enough exercise, or
Mhm.
maybe the guilt is not helping anyone, right? We
Right.
have to start from a place of understanding and self-compassion. But then I think if you're new to exercise and you want to get started, it's taking a couple steps even before you take the first step of exercise. So thinking about, what do you want to gain from exercise? We really have to set our goals, and it doesn't have to be a really overwrought thing, but really, do you want to be able to walk hand in hand with your spouse without feeling off balance? Do
Mhm.
you want to walk your dog without needing extra support? Do you want to walk your child down the aisle next year? Do you want to travel? What is it that really speaks to you that you will be able to come back to when inevitably life and Parkinson's get in the way?
Mhm.
So you said you wanted to know a little bit more about me. So I'm a runner,
Okay.
and I found running during the pandemic, but I was always a gym exerciser, and it
Mhm.
was I have to do it because it's good for me and because I'm getting older and on the days when it was cold or it was snowing or I had a hard day at work, that didn't get me out the door.
Mhm.
But what does get me out the door now is the running races I've put on my calendar,
Mhm.
or whatever it is. Like, that's my goal,
Mhm.
and that's what gets me out the door. So whatever it is that you can come back to that will get you out the door. It's snowing out this morning and I still went out for my run because
Right.
I have, so whatever it is. So it's starting from that point of, what do you want to get to what do you want to get from exercise? What will feel tangible for you?
Mhm.
And then what how confident do you feel that you can achieve this? On a scale, we say like a scale of 1 to 10, and we want you at least a 7. And
Mhm.
if you're not at a 7, why not? what's getting in the way. So it's really about, identifying barriers. Is it your mood? Is it your dyskinesia? Is it your fatigue? What is it? When we
Mhm.
identify it, we can move past it. So those are kind of even before you really, as I said, start
Yeah.
exercising, just kind of having this conversation with
Hmm.
yourself. And then as you get going, of course, there are a lot of supports for if you're brand new to exercise. Physical therapy can really help with building a personal exercise program for you. Go into classes where there are other people with Parkinson's and they can adapt and they understand what you're experiencing. Um, Reading about it online, hearing other people's experiences.
Hmm.
But then just, go slow and be consistent. We're
Hmm.
not looking for, going from a couch to a marathon. We're
Sure.
looking for you to be getting up every day and doing something. So it's that consistency that we're looking for in progress.
Absolutely. I think you established such a great plan, kind of setting a goal and identifying any barriers and kind of working through those. I think that's a great conversation before exercise actually takes place. And I've never heard it described like that before. So that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing. As we move to our next question and kind of a follow-up to the next question or the previous question, do you recommend people utilize a PD specific exercise program? Do they have to jump in and find their local, let's say POP or whatever foundation or Parkinson specific classes, or if they're ready to kind of start a walking routine or a gym routine on their own, what do you recommend?
We always say the best exercise is actually the one you will do, right?
Hmm.
So if that's a group class for you, that's great. And for a lot of people, those are the most beneficial. Group
Hmm.
classes do come with a lot of extra benefits, even outside of the exercise, in the
Hmm.
sense you're, of course, getting socialization, which is
Yeah.
good for your brain. You're getting some accountability. If you
Hmm.
don't show up for class, people are going to wonder where you were, and you're going to
Yeah.
have a reason you weren't there. So there is a lot that's built into classes. They're Parkinson's specific, so they're
Yeah.
helping you tailor for a lot of those symptoms that can come up with or without
Hmm.
exercise. So there are a lot of pros to classes, but they're not for everybody.
Yeah.
And so I would say, don't mandate that you have to go to a class if you're not a group exerciser or if you don't feel like
Hmm.
that works for you. There are a lot of people who do solo exercise or group exercise online. So you're not actually in
Hmm.
person, but you're having that. So
Yeah.
it's about, just kind of modifying, figuring out what works
Hmm.
best for you. And as I said, the classes have a lot of benefits, but if that doesn't feel right for you, that's okay.
Definitely. As we talk about exercise, I wanted to kind of ask you how you feel about exercise and its overall awareness as we think about is it still novel? Are people more aware about the importance of exercise? Have we moved the needle? Personally, right here in Central Virginia, we feel like the needles move and people understand the importance. But how do you feel about the overall education of exercise? And are people kind of truly understanding the need and how imperative it is?
I think you're right in that we're seeing it become much more mainstream,
Hmm.
but there's still a long way to go. And
Yeah.
really, I point to when I left practice 10 years ago, I'll admit I wasn't really talking about exercise. It wasn't a
Yeah.
big thing. So doctors weren't getting this education and
Hmm.
this awareness. Now that's starting to change,
Hmm.
but we still don't get a whole lot of that on the
Yeah.
lifestyle components in
Hmm.
our training.
Yeah.
So, that's one big thing is that doctors aren't really getting the training or they don't have the time to talk about that in a short visit when we're really focused on adjusting
Hmm.
your medicines and
Sure.
can't get
Yeah.
into exercise or all those kinds of things. And then, too, I'll say kind of what I pointed to earlier in the conversation. Our lives just aren't set up for exercise, especially in the US, right? We're
Right.
trained to sit at desks all day long
Yeah.
and to and so it's understandable that this is newer for us. It's a
Mhm.
newer way of life, and making it a way of life really
Yeah.
takes a concerted effort. And the one thing I'll say too that I didn't say in the last question
Mhm.
around exercise too, and part of this component of awareness is when we think about exercise, we often think about cardio or aerobic, so it's the
Mhm.
running, the
Mhm.
walking, the swimming, the biking. And we can't forget all of the other parts of
Yeah.
exercise that are
Mhm.
crucial in Parkinson's. Strength training is a huge one,
Mhm.
especially as we get older, especially as we're postmenopausal as women and we're losing bone, our muscles are getting smaller. So it's making sure we're also doing strength and flexibility, balance, all of these
Mhm.
components of exercise. And then two, outside of exercise, the regular movement, which, as I
Mhm.
said, our lives are not set up for that. I'm set up to sit at this desk all
Right.
day. And unfortunately, I was sad to learn that even if I exercise one time a day and have that bout of exercise, it doesn't cancel out a full day of
Of
sitting. So
sitting.
I still got to be getting up and moving, whether it's
That's
setting a
something we
time.
can all take away right now, right?
Something I'm coaching myself really when I'm saying
Yeah.
that, and like remember to at least get up once an hour and do a circle around the apartment or something. But it's,
Right.
that regular movement is just
Mhm.
as important as exercise. And two, back to the guilt thing, if you don't have to be exercising 5 days a week for 3 hours to get the
Mhm.
benefit. Anything is going to
Mhm.
be better than nothing and is going to be a positive step forward.
Definitely. It's almost a little bit of retraining our brain or the stigma around the word exercise,
Mm.
and not being intimidated by it and understanding that it has such a broad definition and it could be different for the individual.
It's
Um,
so true. And it can be fun. And it
yeah,
can be,
right.
and you can incorporate all these other good things with for your
Yeah.
brain.
Definitely. Well, thank you. I'm going to tie a ribbon around exercise. We're going to move into disease management and therapeutics. Of course, exercise is just one critical component of how to manage the disease and the overall care plan. But as a neurologist, what would you say are the other components to a comprehensive PD care plan?
Well, first, we want people to be seeing a Parkinson's doctor. And for that's a movement disorder specialist, which is a person who's a neurologist and has extra training in Parkinson's and movement disorders. Now, that's not accessible for everybody. There
Right.
aren't enough of these doctors, and there certainly aren't enough in some areas.
Right.
But if you can see a movement disorder specialist at least once a year for a good
Mhm.
check-in and learning the latest research and those sorts of things, it can be really helpful. But
Mhm.
along those lines, it's really about getting your right care team in
Mhm.
place. And we'll
Mhm.
probably talk more about some of those other care team members,
Mhm.
but the care goes far beyond just your movement disorder
Right.
specialist when it comes to Parkinson's. So if balance and walking are a real challenge and you want to see a physical therapist, or if dexterity is getting in the way of your day-to-day and occupational therapy, speech for, so the point being, taking a real good look at your Parkinson's, at what's impacting you most, and where can we add in support on
Mhm.
top of your doctor, on top of your medication that can really round out your team. So it's the care team. It's also your support network. So
Mhm.
you have a good community here, but it's your support team outside of your direct care team, whether that's your spouse or your family or your friends in the Parkinson's community, your faith community. What is it that gives you support in your journey with Parkinson's? And then all of the things that complement exercise. So eating a healthy diet for Parkinson's, we often say most along the lines of Mediterranean or mind diet, which are
Mhm.
really just whole food, plant forward
Yeah.
concepts.
Yeah.
Getting sleep, understanding that's a challenge because of Parkinson's for a lot of people, but getting the best sleep that we can.
Mhm.
Stress management, something we don't focus on enough, but
Right.
really can play a role in exacerbating Parkinson's symptoms. And so really just kind of thinking about holistically in
Mhm.
our whole life, in our day to day, it's back to that lifestyle. What are the things
Yeah.
that we're doing in our day to day that are either positively or negatively influencing our lives, both with and without Parkinson's?
Yeah, absolutely. We'll you quickly touched on some of the other services. For those who aren't familiar what occupational, physical, speech therapies can do for people with Parkinson's, can you break down at a high level those three therapeutics and how folks with Parkinson's can utilize them?
Physical therapy, I heard once described really well. It's physical therapy is kind of below the waist and occupational therapy is above the waist.
Hmm.
Now, that's a
Okay.
really big generalization, but I think
Mhm.
it helps us in the sense physical therapy, you want to think about more for exercise, for walking, for balance, for anything that's really impacting your ability to walk smoothly, if you have freezing of gait, things like that.
Mhm.
Physical therapy can be really helpful in helping manage those symptoms, which oftentimes our medications, our surgeries don't fully get at. But there are a lot of exercises to improve your strength, ways to get over freezing, ways to limit falling or limit injury with falling. So
Sure.
physical therapy can be really helpful in that regard. A lot of physical therapists do recommend that people see physical therapy at the outset. So even if you don't have these problems or you aren't having a lot of balance, meet with them, get a baseline,
Yeah.
establish a relationship. And they say think of it like a dental checkup. Come and see
Mhm.
us every 6 months. Even if you don't
Mhm.
need to see us regularly, come and see every 6 months for a check-in, and let's
Sure.
keep a close eye on things and get ahead of things
Mhm.
if anything's starting to develop. Occupational therapy and physical therapy can do a lot of similar things and
Okay.
complement each other.
Mhm.
But as I said, if we think about occupational therapy more above the waist, it's how do we do our daily activities more safely and easily?
Mhm.
So if you're having trouble with dressing because it's really hard to bend over and pull your socks on, or
Mhm.
brushing your teeth, or typing, or whatever it is that's interfering with your daily activities. Showering is another one, going to the bathroom, anything where you see Parkinson's kind of making these daily activities a little bit more challenging.
Okay.
Occupational therapy can be really helpful with exercises, tools, whether they're
Mhm.
devices, different keypads, or mice for your computer,
Mhm.
whatever it is. They can be really helpful in that regard. And then speech therapy is for people who have changes with their voice or with speech, which
Mhm.
can be very common in Parkinson's, can impact our ability to communicate with our loved ones or to socialize, which are so important. So
Mhm.
speech therapy can be really good with these kinds of exercises that help us speak more loudly and more clearly. It
Mhm.
also helps somewhat with cognition too. So with changes in memory and thinking that can come along with Parkinson's,
Okay.
speech therapy can complement that really well. And
Mhm.
I know you asked only about those three, but I do want to mention also mental health therapy. So
Mhm.
that's a big one that we often don't lump into this
Yeah.
physical, occupational, and speech
Yeah.
therapy, but depression, anxiety, just general changes in
Mhm.
mood are a big thing for a lot of people with Parkinson's as part of the disease. And those can really impact quality of life, how well medications work, how well symptoms are controlled.
Mhm.
And so if that's a challenge or if that's something for you, there are a variety of mental health care professionals, whether it be psychologists, counselors, et cetera, who can help with what we call talk therapy, just talking through these things. And of course, there are also medications as well that can
Yeah.
complement that.
Absolutely. Thank you for noting that. Share with our listeners, remaining on the therapeutics spectrum, share with your listeners a little bit more about DBS, or deep brain stimulation, what it is at a high level, and who really is a candidate for it.
Deep brain stimulation is a surgical procedure for Parkinson's. It's been approved since the 1990s, so it's been around for quite some time. And it's a treatment that eases movement symptoms primarily. So,
Mhm.
like all of our currently available therapies, it can ease symptoms. It doesn't, as far as we know, change the progression, or, certainly doesn't cure the disease of
Mhm.
Parkinson's. What DBS is best for, two main scenarios. One is when people get a good response to medication, levodopa
Mhm.
primarily, but they have complications or side effects that go
Mhm.
along with it.
Mhm.
So say, for example, somebody says, I take my levodopa and it works really well, but I get really bad dyskinesia, that extra movement that can
Mhm.
sometimes
Mhm.
happen with having Parkinson's for some time, taking medication for sometimes. Or I have to take medicine every 2 hours because it really doesn't last very long. I get a good benefit, but it just quickly wears off. And I feel like all day, every day, I'm just kind of going up and down on this
Sure.
roller coaster, what we call
Mhm.
motor fluctuations.
Mhm.
So that's kind of the one main category where people get a good response to medication, but for whatever reason, it's not adequate. And then the other one is when people have tremor that doesn't respond to medication, that we can't get good control of. So those two main scenarios, we ask that, or we look for people who've had Parkinson's at least 4 years and then have one of those scenarios. Now, what DBS entails is putting into one or both sides of the brain very thin wires into the areas of the brain that control movement, and then attaching those wires to like a battery pack or programmer that's inserted oftentimes under the collarbone in the chest, like just where you would think a pacemaker would be
Mhm.
inserted. And doctors program that device to send small electrical impulses up through those wires into the areas of the brain that control movement to stop movement symptoms.
Okay.
So essentially, it controls movement symptoms with what we hope is less, in some cases, no medication, at least for some time, but less medication smooths out the day, gets us
Okay.
better control of our symptoms.
Mhm. As we talk about DBS, we have to move into the focus ultrasound procedure. Our community, as you noted, the Parkinson's community is so bright, they're energized, they do their homework, and they would be so upset with me if I didn't ask you about this emerging therapy, the focus ultrasound, and the treatment for Parkinson's tremor. So share with us where it stands today, what's going on with the focus ultrasound. Is it quite rivaling DBS yet? So share a high level about that new emerging treatment.
Great question, and a lot of interest from the community on
Hmm.
this because it is a newer therapy. So whenever
Right.
we see new therapies, it's great. We're seeing new approvals, but there are a lot of
Yeah,
questions around them.
absolutely.
So focused ultrasound I describe as kind of a new play on an old trick. So
Mhm. Okay.
before we had deep brain stimulation, surgeons would actually open up the brain and go in and use a method like heat or some other way to destroy tiny areas
Hmm.
of cells in the areas that control movement. So
Hmm.
the same areas that we're going into with DBS, they would actually go in, destroy those cells, and stop movement symptoms that way. Well, then we had DBS, and DBS, for a variety of reasons, really took hold. It's reversible. We can turn it off if it's not working. We can
Hmm.
take it out if we have to. But DBS was really the main treatment, the main surgical treatment for obviously the last several decades.
Hmm.
Well, then researchers discovered that we could do the same kind of thing we were doing with surgery, destroy tiny areas of the brain that are causing movement symptoms, but from outside without having to open up using concentrated beams of ultrasound. So high intensity ultrasound beams
Sure.
that we concentrate in an area, kind of like using a magnifying glass to concentrate the sun to burn a little hole in a piece of paper.
Hmm.
And so it's incisionless. We don't have
Okay.
to make any incisions in the brain. It doesn't require any hardware, no wires, no programming, no long-term things like that with DBS.
Okay.
And it's theoretically takes effect right away. So,
Mhm.
at the moment you get it done, it should decrease the symptoms. And then, as I said, there's no long-term follow-up, there's no programming, et cetera.
Okay.
Focused ultrasound right now is approved to treat Parkinson's tremor or to treat Parkinson's symptoms. But the key is it's only approved on one side of the brain. That's because if we do it on both sides, we see that we get too many side effects.
Okay.
So right now we can only do it on one side of the brain, which means it only impacts one side of the body.
Mhm.
That may be of interest for people who don't want to undergo deep brain stimulation or can't undergo deep brain stimulation for
Okay.
one reason or another. People who maybe have really severe tremor on, in their dominant hand that's impacting their ability to do their work or things like that. But it is, caveated with it's only available on one side of the brain right now. We
Okay.
also don't have as long-term of data on it simply
Mhm.
because it's newer. So we probably
Sure.
have about 5 years of data on understanding what the benefits and the potential long-term side effects or
Mhm.
things like that are. Whereas on DBS, we have maybe 15 plus years of
Sure.
data.
Mhm.
And then the last thing I'll say about it is, good news is it's, if you get it done and it works, it's that kind of that one and done sort of
Mhm.
approach. Bad news is if something goes wrong or it's irreversible.
Yeah.
So we're really just we're learning a lot more about it. As
Yeah.
you said, it's emerging. Research is really trying to look at, are there better places in the brain to do it? Can
Okay.
we safely do it on both sides?
Mhm.
So there is a lot of work going to optimize, working toward optimizing this and being able to offer it more as a
Yeah.
regular treatment tool.
It sounds like it's certainly in the emerging refinement stage. So you folks as neurologists can really understand its long-term impact and, its place in treatment for Parkinson's.
And there certainly are people who are getting this therapy, and
Mhm.
there are many centers that, have been researching this and are experts in doing the procedure. It's just,
Sure.
when we compare head-to-head deep brain stimulation and focused ultrasound, to be fair too, they haven't been compared in a trial, right? We haven't taken
Right.
half the people and done DBS and half the people and done focused ultrasound. So we don't
Mhm.
have that direct comparison.
Right.
So I appreciate that it's a hard space for people and families to be navigating as
Yeah.
well, knowing what are the questions, what should I be asking, what should I be thinking about.
Mhm.
But, as I
Absolutely.
said, yeah.
Very good. Well, you touched on lifestyle diet, the mind diet, Mediterranean diet. I wanted to quickly touch on diet on its own. Talk to us a little bit about what kind of some of the basic recommendations are. And second, should those living with PD take a probiotic? There's a lot of information, misinformation. The market's flooded with prebiotics and probiotics. So share kind of a high level what folks should be doing from a dietary standpoint and if prebiotics and probiotics are needed.
These are such great questions, and I could probably talk for 2 hours on these. So you'll have to cut me off. But
No, you're
in
fine.
when we think about a diet for Parkinson's, it's, as I said, along the lines of what we call a Mediterranean or a mind type diet. Mind is a combination of Mediterranean and DASH, and this
Hmm.
mind diet was really created to help support cognition or memory and thinking. Most of the research that's been done to date has lended support to these kinds of diets for people with Parkinson's, showing that through small studies or observations that these diets are linked to reduced risk of
Hmm.
disease, delayed onset, potentially slower progression, less symptoms, all kinds of good benefits. Now, caveat that with nutrition research is really hard to do. It's
Hmm.
really hard to do a controlled trial where we're controlling what somebody eats for a long period of time. And we're
Hmm.
also accounting for any confounding factors that may be offering the benefit.
Hmm.
Maybe the people who
Hmm.
eat well also exercise, right? And so,
Sure.
so
Yeah.
it's really nutrition research, at base is really hard to do.
Yeah.
As I said, most of the research has been done on these diets. So we don't have as much data on ketogenic or intermittent fasting or paleo, all the other ones that you hear about that are popular. There are a lot of
Sure.
anecdotes on those, but we just don't have the breadth of research support that we have for the
Hmm.
Mediterranean and mind. Now, Mediterranean and mind are both what we call whole food, plant forward. So they're
Hmm.
really focusing on whole, unprocessed
Hmm.
foods, the things you'd see around the perimeter of the grocery store,
Hmm.
fruits, vegetables, whole grains,
Okay.
less
The
things in
food as it
boxes and
is.
bags.
Hmm.
Exactly. The food
Yeah.
as I
Yeah.
heard once, when's the last time you saw a white bread loaf growing on a tree, right?
Right.
So, but
Right.
you see apples growing on trees, right? So
Right.
it's kind of just thinking about how
Yeah.
we see things in nature, and the further they get from that, the more processed they are. An apple
Hmm.
versus an apple pie, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's kind of just thinking about that. And that's why it's what we call plant forward, being,
Hmm.
vegetables, grains, beans
Hmm.
as the foundation of our diet. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be a vegan. You have to be a vegetarian. You have to, I think a lot
Right.
of those really put people off. Or if you
Yeah.
feel like you have to really strictly follow a pattern,
Hmm.
this is about a way of life, right? So
Yeah.
if we can get there most of the time, if we can incorporate this, if we can tailor it to what we prefer, to our culture, to our taste buds,
Mhm.
to our symptoms, then we're
Yeah.
more likely to make it a regular way of life. It's not, as I said, about following a really strict, did I get exactly 5 cups of leafy greens in today
Hmm.
or whatever it is, but
Hmm.
it's about, am I getting more fruits and vegetables? And do I have a
Yeah.
vegetable with every meal? Do I have, things like that, and putting it too in the kind of like what we talked about with exercise, but framing in a positive way, not I can't have sugar, but I get
Yeah.
to have more fruit or whatever
Right.
it is.
Yeah.
And on that note too, it's, some days it's going to be best for your health to eat a slice of birthday cake, right? Or
Right.
to eat the Christmas cookie you
Right.
get once a year that reminds you of your grandmother. Or,
Mhm.
so
The
thinking
balance.
about diet as really a way of life.
Hmm.
And the other kinds of things too, I won't go in major detail on it. We have a whole guide on diet if that's of
Okay.
interest to people, but
Okay.
reminding people too that not only when we think about, following kind of the Mediterranean in mind, just in general for best health with Parkinson's, there are also a lot of adaptations we can do with diet to help with symptoms. So
Okay.
whether it be constipation, low
Hmm.
blood pressure,
Hmm.
even having swallowing changes or smell loss, there's a
Hmm.
lot we can do to adapt our diet to help with those symptoms, but
Okay.
also to help kind of work around those symptoms. So smell
Okay.
loss is a good example. You lose your sense of smell, can't taste as well, don't
Hmm.
have a good appetite. That's not good because we don't want you to lose weight.
Right.
So how can we adapt? Is it through textures, through colors, through more
Okay.
spices, through,
Hmm.
all those kinds of things that we can be thinking about as first
Okay.
line on, how do we adapt our diet to suit where we are with Parkinson's or to suit
Okay.
our lifestyle?
Okay. No, that's great. Yeah, as we move on, while often we think about the classic tremor, a lot of folks who don't know a lot about the disease think about the classic tremor. It's synonymous with the tremor. They don't know the other side, particularly around cognition changes. I'd love to talk about the cognitive impact Parkinson's has. What are some of the first steps folks can take when they feel like they are on a cognitive decline or their loved one is pointing it out? What are kind of some of those first steps, first conversations to kind of address that symptom?
It's such a sensitive and tricky topic.
Yeah.
So, Parkinson's aside, what's the one thing most of us fear, right? It's losing our memory or
Yeah.
losing our ability to think, which we tie to our independence and we tie to
Mhm.
who we are as people.
Yeah.
So, it's understandable that it's something we shy away from talking
Mhm.
about or we don't want to talk about because we're all somewhat afraid of it.
Yeah.
I think with these kinds of conversations, the more we can normalize them, the
Mhm.
more we can talk about these kinds of things. It doesn't, if anything, it makes it less scary to be
Mhm.
able to talk about it more openly.
Mhm.
Now, for people with Parkinson's, I remind that memory and thinking, as you said, a lot of people aren't aware of all the non-motor, the non-tremor,
Mhm.
slowness, stiffness, but
Mhm.
all the memory, thinking, mood changes,
Yeah.
sleep problems, all
Mhm.
of this that doesn't
Mhm.
always, but can happen with Parkinson's. So, memory and thinking are certainly something that can be impacted by Parkinson's, really from the point of diagnosis all the way through decades
Mhm.
into
Mhm.
life with the disease in different ways and in
Sure.
different at different levels. Now, a lot of people, especially early on, they'll notice some really subtle changes. Maybe they notice it, family members notice it, maybe just the doctor notices it on testing.
Sure.
But this could be things with trouble like multitasking. A lot of people will say, I used to be able to juggle 100 things and now can only really like focus on the task at hand.
Yeah.
Or trouble with kind of processing, a little bit slower to answer questions or to learn a new phone or a new TV remote or things like that. So
Mhm.
these are kind of subtle. We notice them, but maybe they don't interfere with our day to day.
Mhm.
Then you get kind of the next sort of step on that is what we would call mild cognitive impairment. So these are still mild changes, but we're noticing that they're having some
Mhm.
impact in our
Mhm.
day to day. And then on from there, you can have more significant changes. Again, do not happen in everybody, but happen more the longer you live with
Yeah.
Parkinson's, or more likely to happen the longer you live with
Mhm.
Parkinson's. So I think to get to your question of how do we actually broach this topic and address it, acknowledging that this is a
Yeah.
scary thing, that we
Mhm.
don't want to talk about it,
Yeah.
that, how do we feel about it? I'm worried if I notice something that means my Parkinson's is really progressing. Or
Mhm.
I'm worried that if I point out something I'm concerned about in my loved one, that they're going to feel ashamed or
Yeah.
guilty or, what. So it's really about how can we make this an open part of our conversation and a regular part of our conversation, but in a way that feels okay to
Yeah.
everybody who's involved. And the last thing I'll say is just making sure that you're talking with your doctor about this. So if this is something that you want to closely monitor, you want to learn more about, bring it up to your doctor because your doctor may not always bring it up. We
Sure.
too may shy
Mhm.
away from it because we don't want to scare you or we don't want to
Yeah.
give you something else
Yeah.
to worry about, or we have so many other things going on that we want to address first. So if this is something that you're concerned about, bring
Mhm.
it up to your doctor and say, hey, is this
Okay.
something we can monitor? How can we monitor it? What else can I be doing? There's exercise, there's healthy
Mhm.
diet, there's stress, all the things you're already doing for your Parkinson's help boost your brain health. But
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, just making sure that you are monitoring it and you are doing what you can do to support your brain health can really help you feel that sense of control and
Yeah.
action.
Yeah. And I think what you noted, speaking to your doctor, because people might not be aware that there are tests that you can work with a neuropsychologist and maybe kind of get a baseline on cognitive health. So I think what you said is such a great takeaway. Just start with your neurologist and kind of just start the conversation so you can see any changes over time, potentially. Um, I'd like to move on to sleep, which I feel like might be the hardest question in the whole interview because it seems so nebulous for those living with the disease. Many people living with Parkinson's experience such sleep difficulty. Share with our listeners some basic sleep hygiene tips and how to mitigate issues that inevitably arise when you're living with Parkinson's.
I always say I feel like it's hypocrite isn't the right word, but I just feel a little like I lose a little credibility when I'm like, get good sleep when you
Yeah.
live, as part of your
And
lifestyle.
everyone's like,
And so,
okay, I'm
yeah, yeah, whatever that means. Yeah,
trying.
exactly. Because Parkinson's really can, as you said, it can impact sleep for
Mhm.
so many people and in so
Yeah.
many different ways. So it could
Yeah.
be trouble falling asleep, trouble staying asleep, waking up too early in the morning, whatever it is.
Mhm.
But I do always want to start from that point of acknowledging that Parkinson's itself can really impact sleep. So for some people, even though they say I do everything and it's back to that like self-compassion and guilt. Like if you're
Yeah.
doing everything and still having, maybe we need medication or maybe we
Yeah.
just need to talk with your doctor further. But acknowledging that it can be difficult to get good sleep with Parkinson's. Now, that being said, let's look at all the ways we can, what I would say is invite good sleep. It may not come, it may not take
Right.
that
You're
invitation,
just sending the
but yeah,
invitation.
but let's do everything we can. And really, it starts the moment we wake up, right? So a
Mhm.
lot of us, we don't think about sleep until it's time to go to bed or we're
Mhm.
brushing our teeth, but
Sure.
really the moment we wake up. So from how much light exposure you're getting at the beginning
Okay.
of the day, are you getting out and getting natural light? Are you eating a good breakfast right when you wake up to kind of get you awake
Okay.
and into the day? Are you moving? We talked about moving. Are you
Mhm.
moving regularly through the day?
Mhm.
Are you, we talked, light, but are you getting good natural sunlight throughout the day by sitting near windows, by going for walks during the day? And are you dimming your lights and your screens and all of those things as you
Mhm.
get, closer to bedtime? So it's thinking about all of these things, whether it's light, movement, our diet,
Mhm.
what are we eating and when are we eating? Are we eating a huge bowl of carbs and
Mhm.
pasta right before
Sure.
bedtime that are keeping us awake and
Mhm.
also making us digest so that
Okay.
we are uncomfortable? So we can think about what we're eating, when we're eating. Most people will say, try to eat your last meal at least 3 hours before you go to bed,
Mhm.
and be thinking about, what the makeup of that meal is.
Okay.
Alcohol is a big one. We
Mhm.
often think alcohol, a little nightcap will help us fall asleep. Maybe it will, but it actually interferes with the quality of sleep
Mhm.
and we tend to wake up more. So it's really thinking about, when are you timing your exercise? Exercising in the beginning of the day may be more helpful than exercising close to bedtime, although
Okay.
if that's what works for you, then that's what works for you. But thinking about all of those kinds of things, how can you structure your day and everything else that you're doing to
Mhm.
invite your best sleep? And then you mentioned sleep hygiene. There are some specific things we can do really focused on sleep itself.
Okay.
So, a good routine, going to bed and
Mhm.
getting up at the same time every day within about a 1 to 2 hour window.
Okay.
So even if you didn't sleep, well, getting up and at that time to kind of train your body.
Mhm.
It's setting up a nighttime routine, just like we maybe have a morning routine where we drink our
Yeah.
coffee, take our medication, do what's your nighttime routine? It's,
Mhm.
maybe you're an hour before you're taking a warm bath, you're drinking a decaffeinated tea, you're reading a book, and you're shutting down all of your screens, so
Mhm.
how are you training your body and your
Mhm.
brain to get in the mode of sleep? And
Okay.
then when we get into, actually going to bed, it's using the bedroom only for sleep and
Mhm.
intimacy,
Mhm.
not for playing Candy Crush on your phone
Mhm.
and not for, whatever it
Yeah.
is. But
Yeah.
it's, again, it's training your body
Yeah.
that when we get in bed, we are going to sleep, making your bedroom as dark as possible, whether that's with
Mhm.
curtains or an eye mask, and keeping it cool, using
Yeah.
sheets that keep you cooler, using sheets that maybe help you move over more in bed if,
Okay.
if you have challenges
Mhm.
moving over. So it's really it's kind of just taking this, this evaluation to
Yeah.
what am I doing throughout the day, all the way up to and including bedtime. And
Yeah.
we have resources that kind of detail this more
Okay.
clearly, but it's looking at what are the ways that I might be helping or
Yeah.
harming my sleep, and
Okay.
how can we optimize those, knowing that maybe we still won't get good sleep because of Parkinson's, but we can do everything we can to
Sure.
optimize that.
Yeah. Taking a little inventory and seeing what we may inadvertently be training ourselves to
Yep.
be doing accidentally. But no, I think that's great. I'd like to move on to the last category, current research and development. We talked about the last 10 years really being exciting. Even in the last couple of years, there's just so much exciting research happening in the Parkinson's sphere. What are some of the projects and research endeavors that you're most excited about right now?
One of the biggest ones really centers on the biomarker that you mentioned. There was so much buzz over the last couple of years. And
Mhm.
while this isn't the sexiest kind of
Mhm.
finding, it's a huge one
Mhm.
in the sense that when this biomarker, this objective test was validated in people with Parkinson's, it really gave us a huge step forward in our research in the sense that we can now make sure we're getting the right people in the right trials.
Mhm.
Now, it's a huge step, but it's a first step in the
Yeah.
sense that there's a lot of work that now is ongoing to optimize this biomarker.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
the test is our first way to see Parkinson's in a living person. Yes or no, do you have the Parkinson's biology, the
Mhm.
abnormal Parkinson's protein?
Mhm.
Now we need to be able to say, how much do you have? Is it changing over time? What
Yeah.
does it mean that it's changing? How does that correlate with your symptoms and your progression? If we try to decrease that protein with a medication or a therapy in clinical development, how much are we able to impact it? And what does that do to our symptoms? Make it more accessible. Right
Mhm.
now, this is available mostly through a spinal tap or a lumbar puncture. And
Okay.
so how can we make it more, put it in a blood test or a cheek swab or something like
Mhm.
that?
Mhm.
So a lot of work that focuses on that biomarker or those
Mhm.
biomarkers that really supports our research
Mhm.
toward tools that could slow the disease, that could get us better treatments in general.
Okay, yeah, I think that's fantastic. It's like you said, it's not the sexiest, but it's very exciting for our community, and you really the trajectory potentially for the disease. So, there's a lot to be excited about. I wanted to kind of talk about how to get folks involved in research. There's so much research happening. It might be a little bit overwhelming for people with Parkinson's, but we need them to participate in research. So, what would be the first next step that you would recommend folks to go to say, like, I want to participate. Where can I find something local that I can, have a part in and take part in?
Well, first, I underscore what you said, which is we won't get results without people with
Mhm.
Parkinson's
Mhm.
participating. And every new treatment that we have, this biomarker that we have,
Mhm.
is because of people who stepped up and
Mhm.
volunteered.
Mhm.
We would not move forward without people and families. We need
Yeah.
family members and loved ones, people who don't have Parkinson's as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
There is a lot of research, as you said, and it can feel overwhelming. But the good news about that is that there's something for everyone, right? So there are online trials, there are in-person trials, there are trials that just require one visit, and then there are trials where you come in every month for a year,
Mhm.
whatever it
Mhm.
is. But the point being, there is a research opportunity for
Yeah.
everyone.
Mhm.
Probably one of the easiest is the Michael J. Fox Foundation's Parkinson's Progression Markers Initiative, or PPMI. And that's looking for people both with and without Parkinson's. There's a big online component to it. I'm a research participant in that, where you fill out questionnaires every couple months about your symptoms or about if things have changed, and it helps us kind of track over time. Now,
Mhm.
for people like me who are participating, it's helping the researchers compare normal aging, or
Mhm.
without Parkinson's, to what Parkinson's looks like, or how
Mhm.
Parkinson's comes on from the earliest moments. So that's an easy one in the sense it requires, a questionnaire every couple months. Some people will be invited from that study to participate in clinic in person.
Okay.
Doesn't mean you have to if that's not of interest to you, but the online component is a really good first step, and a much needed first step in really expanding our research even further.
Okay, no, I think that's great. And I think the underlying takeaways are something for everyone. And we need folks with Parkinson's and their families to step up. So thank you for sharing that. Dr. Dolan, that does it for me. I can't thank you enough for being with Power of Parkinson's and the Pop Profile series. I know our community is going to really enjoy this really high level interview with where we tried to touch on a little bit of everything. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Yes, we could talk for days about
We
all of these
could.
different things. So
We
thank you for
really
having
could.
me. I'm so
Yeah,
happy to be with you and with your community, and happy that your community is part of our community.
absolutely. Thank you.